Welcome everybody. Today we're discussing Parsha Shoftim, Judges. We start with the prayer, merging the heavens and earth, which is the key for any clarity of judgment on any level. Merging the heavens and earth and heart and mind, what we call Hukmah Halev, because any clarity of mind, any judgment we has to have the wisdom of heart connected. Hashem Yikud Kedusha Brihu Ushinate Bi'ilu Imulaya Jemyuki Bavavke Biyada Shalom Sham Kozreel Kolam Amen. Shoftim, Judges, is so relevant today, it's hard to know where to begin. But let's just talk about appointing judges. What's the quality for a judge? They have to be unbiased. They can't be bribed. They have to be spiritually evolved. They have to not favor any group because they're more wealthy over somebody because they're poor or wherever their politics are. And you can look around today and see none of that is happening today. It's very rare that there is a judge, even to the very point of the Supreme Court. Well, yes, you can't be bribable. It's like none of that is in order today, and that's why the judicial system in the United States and pretty much around the world is in great failure. I'll give you an example of how they were thinking. So this younger man and this older man were having to cross this river. It was a little difficult. There was a flood. So the younger man said, he doesn't know the older guy. He says, hey, look, I'm happy to help you here, okay? Let me guide you across. And so he takes his hand and he helps him cross the river. They make it safely. And then they talk. And the young man says, well, I'm going to a court for something, some issue. And the older man says, let me get clear. What's the issue? And the young man explains it. And the older man says, I'm supposed to be the judge for that, but because you helped me cross the river, I can't be the judge anymore because I now am a little biased because you did a kindness to me, even though you didn't know who I was. So they were that strict. Now, we understand what happens today, and it's not just today. I grew up Mayor Daley, Chicago, in the 40s, and I will tell you, there was no such thing as justice in the court. It's who you knew and who you talked to. That's just the way it was and still is, even to the highest level of the Supreme Court, because the judges are bribable, and none of them are leading the exemplary life, or probably none of them, that the judges in those days had to be living. So they were living a pure life, and they had to be examples of the ethics and morality of the time of holding that. So that's a big problem, and that's why judges aren't really seen about who's the most qualified as a legalist, but what's their political position. That does play a role. We can't ignore that doesn't play a role. So that being said, the very principle of how to organize and create some level of order in the society has fallen by the wayside at the very highest levels. Bribable, political pressure. Okay. Now, that's the outer part. Okay. That's, in a sense, the simple part. Yeah. And we do need the outer part to create order in society. It's obvious that people riot and pillage and beat up people, and then the DA or the judges, they set them free. It's like we have chaos. Okay, that's what happens when you don't have judges. Now, that's the simple part. Let's get into a more spiritually evolved part, which is really what our focus needs to be here. So think judges as being negative thoughts in your mind, excessive criticism in your mind, which blocks us from our spiritual evolution. Now, we do need feedback. We need to grow from that feedback, but this is not what we're talking about. We're talking about excessive criticism, negative criticism that we hold in our own mind that blocks us. Okay? Feeling guilty. The dark side loves us to feel guilty because it separates from God. Now, the truth is, we all make mistakes. None of us are perfect. But that being a given, we have to have a way of working with it. So on the individual way about negative thoughts coming into our mind, because I think it's important to understand this, there's a beautiful story about the unknown brother of Rabbi Zusha and Rabbi Elimelech. Some of their students went to see who this unknown brother was. Like, who you got a third brother? What's he up to? So they track him down, and they find that he's running well, I guess we'll call it a bar, but it's not really a bar. It's a tavern, right? And he's serving vodka, and they're looking. It's like, this is very ordinary. But they note one thing. Every few minutes, he takes out a piece of paper and writes something down. They don't know what it's about, but it's a little peculiar to them. So that night, because they are students of Reb Zusha and Reb Elimelech, he invites them to stay overnight as his guests. So they go to bed, and about an hour later, they hear this thumping and yelling and screaming. It's like, what's going on? And they thought, oh, there must be something really bad. And they rush into his room, and they break through the door. There he is with his shirt off, and he's obviously in kind of semi-meditation. He's crying. They said, what's going on? He said, during the day, whenever I have a negative thought, I write it down. And at night, I seek forgiveness for having that negative thought. And I make every effort I can to change excess, this is not my words, excess, the source where the negative thought came from, and seek forgiveness. And when I cry enough, eventually my tears erase the negative thought that I've written down on the paper, and then I know it's been forgiven. Well, obviously they were totally blown out by what I can't. Wow. Okay. Every single thought this person had that was not aligned with the truth, or was not aligned with God, he's seeking forgiveness at night to rectify it. Now, this is an important principle, right? Rectify, meaning you can change it. That's key in the Torah teachings. You aren't stuck with the negative thought for the rest of your life. No, you can change it. So here's a person, before he goes to sleep, he's clarifying and upgrading negative thoughts into positive thoughts before he can go to bed. And he's doing this every day. Wow. Well, they obviously were pretty blown out about it, but it's a profound teaching. This is a way we can begin not to accumulate negative thinking in our lives, to really challenge ourselves. So that's one level. Now, there's kind of bigger levels to this than just a negative thought, and that has to do with what I'm going to call alignment with the divine. So what does that mean? Well, we kind of look at it and we can say, when you're reconnected with your soul and you're amplifying your connection with your soul, the negative thoughts tend to be greatly diminished. When you can see God not only in yourself but in other people, love your neighbor as yourself, that's another step to it. And then the third step is to see the dance of the divine in all things. So this is the next level, and it goes along with the idea of be simple with God. Now, I didn't mean be simple-minded, right? I mean be simple. So, rectify your connection with your soul, get in alignment with your soul, repair your soul that way every day, really, as far as I'm concerned, every moment. Then, check what you're doing with other people so you love your neighbor as yourself, and finally see the dance of the divine in all things. That's pretty powerful, and that's a deeper level of understanding the judgments. Okay, so now that's the next level. Now, negative thoughts are a little complicated because it's our own programming, it's the programming of society. We buy different stories about who we are from the whole matrix. That's one of the ways the matrix controls us. So, what to do about that? How do we kind of undo that and bring clarity? First up, we have to acknowledge them and see them. Now, there are 6 mitzvot that help us. These are what we call the permanent mitzvot, which are to know there's only God, there is a God, no idol worship, to know there's, in a sense, only God in all creation. That's 3. To feel love towards God. Okay, 4. 5 is fear and awe. And I don't mean fear, but I mean awe of God. And finally, negative thoughts, erasing negative thoughts. So that's a really important thing. So those 6, let's say, I'm going to say permanent mitzvot. Okay, and they say in the time of the Messiah, there'll be 3 more. 1, teshuvah. In other words, the ability to change it around. Okay, and we'll get back to that in just a second. And then become the living expression of the Torah, so that as you know Torah, you become the living expression of how that manifests in the world. Okay, and finally, to, in essence, see God in all of creation. And what I mean by that is sanctifying the name of God in all creation. So that's 9, but we're starting with 6. So they also talk about the 6 cities of refuge. What's that? Well, inherent in the Torah is that, yes, things happen. So the cities of refuge were set up if somebody happened to kill somebody by accident, right? You're chopping wood, and the head of the axe flies off and kills the person next to you. Okay, obviously he didn't do it on purpose. Okay, and so you could escape to cities of refuge where you'd be protected, and you had to be there until the presiding high priest left his body. So whatever that cycle was, that's a longer explanation, but the high priest is somehow connected to what happens in society spiritually. So let's take the idea of cities of refuge to a different level, okay? And we have the cities of refuge, and think about the 6 permanent mitzvot. And they create a framework, if we're living within them, of a safe space, of a place where we can focus on God, a place where we have the potential of liberation, which is inside that cube, we have the space of liberation. So when we're holding those 6 permanent mitzvot, okay, which is a key thing to get in this bigger picture, including no negative thoughts, we are in and have set the field and have set the space for liberation, which is the point of Torah. That's why I wrote the book. Torah is a guide to enlightenment. Now, not everybody's thinking at that level, I understand, but I'm speaking to people who are thinking that way. Torah is a guide to enlightenment, and those 6 create point 7, which is the desire, Devikut, Heirut, the desire for liberation. So you need that outer framework to create the inner space. So those are the really cities of refuge from a spiritual point of view. So we're dealing with the different metaphors, and in the Messianic time we have the other aspects of that. But Teshuvah, one of those aspects, is absolutely key to the liberation process. So we're not going to wait till the Messiah comes to kind of get to that. So let's look at it in a slightly different way. The number 6 is the letter Vav. Now, I don't talk too much about the gematria things, but in this case it's very relevant. So Vav is the ability, and we are in the month of Elul. Now, what's the month of Elul? It's the month where the gates to the heavens are most open to us. It's the month where we can go back in the past and transform our negative, non-productive thoughts and actions back into the light. Pretty key. Vav is the power to go back into the past and transform the darkness into the light. Now, playing with the gematria again, let's understand that the letter Vav, which is basically a straight line with a little hook on it, can't quite do it with my finger like that, is the ability to go back in time and space. It also happens to be the 6th letter, or the 22nd letter, and also the 22nd word. And the 22nd word in the Torah is, let there be light. So Vav takes us into the light, out of the darkness of our actions. So it's very, very, obviously very, very powerful, right? So think Vav, think 6, think the 6 cities of refuge, think the 6, let's say, eternal mitzvot, and you're starting to get the idea of how interlocked things are. So Vav is the ability to go back in time and space, to do teshuvah, and in a sense access the thought form that created the negative thought or the negative action, and dissolve that thought form so we no longer have it in us to keep making more of those thought forms. Pretty cool. The month of Elul is the best month of the year to do that. Best time. So it's also the time, as I say, where the gates to heaven are more open. So it was in the month of Elul that we chose to go to the concentration camps, and also later, like a few years ago, to Blood Island, where 250 Native Americans had been massacred, and create a gateway energetically where the souls from the different concentration camps could be elevated to the heavens, because they were stuck because of the Birkenau and the different concentration camps they were stuck. So we actually went during that month for the power of the month of Elul to free the souls so they can ascend. That's how powerful the month of Elul is, and you could see the souls ascending. Literally, everyone that took part in these ceremonies that we guided could see the souls going up, and some people had actually come back to try to find their people who had actually escaped from the concentration camps, like Birkenau, also known as Auschwitz, came back and they could see one person described seeing his mother and his sister ascend. He was obviously quite happy because that's why he went there. So get how powerful this time is. So we're talking about not just release souls, but releasing negative thought forms so they no longer haunt us and keep us in that place of negative thoughts. Remember, that's one of the 6 eternal mitzvot, is no negative thoughts. So wow, That's how powerful that is. So number 6, Vav, okay? It allows us to go back into the past to clear those. And this is our time. I certainly, stuff that I'm doing and looking at negative thought forms and negative actions I've created, I'm using this month again to go back with the power of Vav. So, another level. Now, there's also the power of the shofar. And every morning, except for Shabbat, we do the Psalm 27, and we blow the shofar again to release these. So what do we know about the shofar? Well, that got activated in the time of Yitzhak. Yitzhak, power of judgment, din, okay? And that's activated. But the shofar is there to elevate us so we're not stuck in din. Okay, that's part of the shofar. The other part of the shofar is that who was the first shofar? Was it the ram at the time of Yitzhak? No. The first shofar was us. Hashem blew into that figure the breath of life. So who was the first shofar? Us humans. And we became the living image of God. So every time I blow the shofar, I'm connecting to the breath of life. Now, if we be a little bit metaphorical here, we can see that this forced mass thing around the world is just the opposite. It blocks the breath of life. It blocks the power of the shofar to bring life and to bring liberation. Because really, when you understand the shofar at a little bit deeper level, when you're blowing it, you're actually dissolving, if you're thinking that way, all your negative thought forms. It creates a vortex. It takes them away. Wow. So, power of shofar. And every morning, except for Shabbat and the last day of this cycle of Elul, we're blowing the shofar to release the negative thought forms. And more important to me is to remember, we are the breath of life. And God blew into us and gave us our soul. And we don't ever want to lose that. There are forces today that clearly don't want us to be connected to our soul, connected to each other. Love your neighbor yourself. No, get away from your neighbor. All that's hysteria. It's not the way things really are, but I'm not going to go into a whole discussion of viruses. Besides their aerosol viruses and the masks don't work at all. No evidence, no peer-reviewed evidence to show that masks work, period. I have a long paper on it, but that's one statement. No scientific journal, peer-reviewed evidence shows that masks make any difference. So, what predominates? The breath of life. What predominates? The shofar that brings the spirit into us. What predominates is the shofar that helped us dissolve our negativities. Not bad. It's a good start. Now, let's go a little deeper. Because this Shoftim, okay, we got the external judgments. Now we have the internal judgments. And there's kind of one other piece to this, which is, if we go the deepest level, Shoftim is how do we align our heart with the heart of God? Now let's think about that. What is required? Because that's ultimately, when you're clearing all the negative thought forms that we create, that society puts into us, that our parents put into us, and that we do on our own because of our ego. It's like, finally, our heart and the heart of God can become one. What blocks it? Ego. What blocks it? Ego needs a sense of separation because that keeps us from God. And so the ego can be in control rather than consciousness being in control. Okay, now we're starting to understand here. So, what keeps us from merging with the heart of God? Separation. Now let's take separation a little further, because you can see that happening in our society today. And we rarely see it in the United States right now. Separation has to do with ego. What does ego like to do? It likes to be one up on the other person. It likes to judge the other person not for their elevation of consciousness, but to feel better than them. So there's a role for judgment. Don't misunderstand. I mean, the people around me who give me feedback, who are doing it for my upliftment, I am very grateful. Okay, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about where people make judgments of others so that they get their own ego gratification. And of course, we see that happening big time in society today. And then it doesn't just go to ego judgment, it really goes separation. And finally, ultimate separation, hatred. Hatred when there's no communication, hatred when there's no effort to create unity, to restore the balance of humanity. Hatred is where we have random acts of violence. And ultimately, hatred is when we even try to destroy other people. So hatred is the antithesis of the Torah teachings. It's the antithesis of the meaning of Shoftim, of judgment. The purpose of judgment is to elevate each other, not to destroy each other. So we can apply that obviously to what's happening in society today. So again, feedback is important, but it only has spiritual meaning. It has meaning for our liberation when it has to do with elevating us, so we can kind of we can grow spiritually. So when we see Shoftim, judges, actually as a key part of the liberation process, everything works. We bring unity with God, we bring unity with each other, and we have a way of releasing the negative thought forms, so we create a quiet mind so we can transcend the mind. Very powerful, very beautiful. And we create enough order in society so we can be involved in our spiritual practices, so we can work on that. Without that, we get fire of destruction. Okay? So with Vav, we pull the light out of the darkness and illuminate the darkness, but the fire of destruction, different story, and that's what we're seeing in the world today. I won't go into detail on that, but our job is to reconnect to the light of God in the ways I'm mentioning, clear the negative thoughts of the mind, lots of ways to do that. I even teach a course in it called 0 Point. Clear the negative thoughts of the mind so that our mind can be clear enough so that we could more powerfully connect with the divine, that our heart becomes one with the heart of God. Our will becomes one with the will of God. That's the beauty of Shoftim. And that's why it's so important, taken the right way, for our liberation process. May everybody be blessed with the understandings of Shoftim, and we apply it to our lives in a really good way to elevate ourselves, not to put ourselves down, not to go into guilt, not to go into excessive self-judgment, but to elevate ourselves and free ourselves from the negative thoughts, whether we're doing it like Reb Zusha and Reb Eli Melech's brother, which is really good, whether we go deeper and get to the source of where those negative thoughts are coming from. The idea is clear the negative thoughts, clear the judgments, the self-judgments, so we can evolve spiritually. Peace be with you. Shalom, shalom, shalom. Amen.